Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. So welcome back to the next episode of the Deconstructed Woman podcast. Today, we wanted to talk about body image and the way that that has kind of evolved over time. Joji and I were talking about how a lot of times we have been taught, either handed down from generation to generation or through media and all the influences that we see on a daily basis, magazines, anything you can imagine, billboards, where we have these certain representations of what women are like or what the expectations are for us. And so we wanted to talk about how that has evolved for us and how in society in general that has looked. So I can speak for myself. I grew up in a household where there was the encouragement that when you left the house, you had to make sure that you were ready for the day. So I very rarely left the house in sweatpants. I was always dressed, had my makeup done, and that has kind of continued into today and my current phase of life. And for me, it was always, you never knew who you were going to run into. You always had to look nice. And it was funny because there would be certain times where, I could dress casually, but I didn't really know what that meant because for me, casual seemed like lounging around the house, and anything aside from that, that's not how you leave the house. So that was kind of initially for me kind of the standard that was set. And so I always had to do my makeup. I always had to make sure that I looked a certain way. And I think I don't see that as a negative. I think it was a positive for me, but it does put a lot of pressure to get myself made up in the morning. And maybe that doesn't always need to be. So, Joji, what has your experience been of body image and how you present?
For me, I think as I thought about this, I mean, this is such an emotional issue, I think, not only for us, but also for all women, because I think that, we've been basically led to believe and accept that, body image or beauty is just something that we're never going to be able to accomplish because the beauty icons are so outside of reach. And I think it sets a really high stage in my family when I was growing up. I think all of us kids were sort of indulged as children. But then there was this expectation as you hit adolescence. Well, now you've got to slim down, or you can't eat all this food, or now it's serious. Like now, you have to be taking better responsibility for your appearance. But then for the first X amount of years, basically, we were given anything we wanted, and there was very few rules around eating and being healthy and making good food choices or whatever. So then, we have bad eating habits, and then now the pressure is for us to, because we're at a certain age, have a certain body type or whatever. And for me as a girl, there was a lot of pressure because my family spoke incessantly about arranged marriages and what that was going to be like, and partner, and I've got to be this and that and the other. And the beauty standard between Indians, like I'm from India, is very different in certain ways from what the United States Western beauty looks like. And so I think that part of that issue is trying to live between two cultures and try to figure out how do I fit into this picture. For example, in India, being light skinned is very beautiful, and in the United States, tanning is really beautiful, and so there's just so many differences that makes it really hard to know who am I. And I think that there's no doubt in my mind that I grew up, very much not feeling comfortable in my own body, and not knowing, definitely not accepting my body in many ways. And when I was in high school, I was a pretty chunky kid. Then adolescence hit me, and I became even more chunky. And when I got to high school, I knew that this was not what other people, you know, thought was beautiful. And I already stuck out like a sore thumb because I was one of the few non um, Caucasian children in high school, and I really didn't want to stand out. And so I actually, I sort of feel like I became a little anorexic. I didn't eat very much. I lost a lot of weight, and for the first time, my family thought I was beautiful, and it was really interesting because that shaped me a lot. Because it didn't matter that I only ate once a day and I didn't eat meals with them or any of that kind of stuff. It was just that for the first time now I had this physique, and it was almost like they thought, oh, we could marry her off now, and it was a very strange feeling. And so that's been sort of my experience. And I think I've spent the majority of my adult life struggling with weight issues, wanting to be somebody I'm not, thinking that everybody else was more beautiful than I am, and just really stumbling along trying to figure out like, who am I and how do I don't really think that I'm completely there yet. I think I'm still sort of scarred by that, but I'm much better off than I was. So, I think my situation was a little extreme, but that's sort of the way I grew up, sort of uh, seeing myself and not liking what I saw anytime, even when I was really, thin in high school, ever thinking like, oh, I look good. I don't think I ever thought that. I think my family reacted to that, but I don't think I did. And so I think that's just sort of been the flavor of my life, is just always wanting to be something I'm not and trying to aspire for something that I don't know if I will ever achieve, just because it's not reasonable, but yet in my head, it's still the beauty standard that I'm used to. What do you think has been the greatest influence on you in terms of what shapes your idea of body image? I mean, do you think it's TV and movies and celebrities, or do you think it is all the advertisement or the magazines we read as kids, or teen magazines? What do you think, looking back, or was it your family, that influenced you the most?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting over here and I'm nodding a lot. It's interesting because I think my I was in my best shape in high school and I've never been able to get back there, or at least get to a weight that I think, I mean, if you go off BMI, uh, I'm considered morbidly obese, which I think is a really cruel title for somebody who's
Agreed.
larger. It's just the BMI, like, they have the categories, and I'm like, that's so rude because I don't feel obese in any way, shape, or form. And I'm just proportioned differently. Like, I don't think that they consider different cultures. I don't know. I haven't done the research on the BMI, but it drives me nuts because I'm proportioned differently. I'm not, like a kind of like a bell curve in some ways, but needless to say, I was my best shape in high school, and then I've always been overweight or obese, if you will, and I don't think I've ever not felt comfortable in my body though, and it seems like, kind of, I was listening to you and I was like, I can definitely relate. Like, there's been moments where I'm like, I should really lose weight, but it's never been to feel better in my body. It's always been, I probably should lose weight because I'm likely going to get diabetes, or I probably should lose weight because I want to be healthier so I can run around my kids. Like, it's always been kind of motivated by something else. So I think for everybody, the motivation to be a certain way, there's different motivations for that. So as
Yeah.
far as what has influenced me, or what has kind of driven that, is really just to be healthier. And so when I see, you know, a group of moms, or I see, honestly, the people who influence me the most are the people I drive by in my morning commute that are running. I'm like, oh, that's a healthy person. That person is doing something right. I wish I could be more like them. Of course, I'm not we've talked about this. I'm not a runner. So I don't know why that's what, the image that I'm going for, because I'm not going to achieve that. But to me, I've always felt comfortable um, being the size that I am, but it's been a motivation to want to be healthier. I shouldn't be this size because the BMI tells me that I need to lose weight. but me personally, I feel just fine.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, I mean, that is a gift. I think that when you feel good in your own skin, um, I think that's the best thing ever, because I've met a lot of women who are not the, I don't know, like the weirdly shaped Barbie or somebody like that, or and you know, I think society would consider them larger women, but they are working it. I mean, they are confident. They are you know, very very comfortable with who they are, and because of that you know, they just display that to whoever they're with. I have found that men find them extremely attractive. There's never any shortage of, you know, dating opportunities for these ladies, because I do think that when you are comfortable in your skin, then it doesn't matter what size you are, because people pick up on your confidence, and that's what's really attractive. I worry because I, you know, am on some medication now, which is actually helping me lose weight. But honestly, when I look in the mirror, I don't see anything different. I see exactly the same thing. And that worries me a little bit, because I don't know what is wrong with me in that way. You know, I mean, when I put my clothes on and my clothes fit differently, yes, I know that physically that's different. But mentally, when I look in the mirror, I see exactly the same person I was 6 months ago before I started the medication. And that just makes me, you know, worry about myself. And, you know, if I don't have I'm not a good judge of my own self. And that to me feels like I will always be unhappy and I will never be at a good place. But one of the things that I found when I was doing some reading about this, because body image is almost a dirty word to me, and I hate to say it that way. I hate talking about body image because, you know, it's like the haves and the have-nots. I mean, if you were to poll women, they would say they're not happy with their body. And, you know, I found data that there was an article in Psych Central, and it said like 80% of women are dissatisfied with their bodies. I mean, 80%. I can't get over that. And the other thing, I mean, you have, you know, two very young daughters, but I think about this research that said 42% of first to third graders want, you know, want to lose weight.
Because they're so young and they're just like just starting to understand the world around them. But I also know that that's also the phase where they start playing with Barbies, and I know we talk too, so I don't want to deter us too far, but I wonder if, you know, that's kind of part of that, but it's kind of just mind-boggling.
Yeah, and 81% of 10-year-olds want to lose weight. I mean, where are these messages, you know, getting to our children at such a young age that before the age of 10, they have already decided that they don't want to be fat, and they're already unhappy with their bodies. And I know that I've been guilty of, you know, making comments, you know, uh, to my daughter, and I caught myself because I find myself repeating, you know, things that I've heard. And that's the other thing that I heard was familial thin inheritance. So like instead of familial inheritance, it's thin inheritance, and the fact that women and mothers will push that onto their children. And I know that there were times that I did that without thinking. I just did it recently, and I had to talk to my child and say, you know, I'm really sorry. I know that that was not the right thing to do. And kindly enough, I got the message that, well, at least you caught it, and that was important. But I mean, I kicked myself for that because I hated being that person that was talked to that way. And but why is it that I see, you know, a different body form and I'm like, oh, well, why, you know, why are you dressed this way, or why are your clothes not fitting you properly, or you know, those kinds of things. And I don't aspire to be that person, but I have caught myself doing that. It's really difficult. What do you think about this familial thin in thin inheritance? I mean, it sounds like your parents had a very balanced um, view, and they wanted you to be put together well when you left the home, but it doesn't seem like you got any messages about, you know, feeling good and accepting your body the way that it is.
Yeah, I think I mean, I definitely I would say like, mm, a couple of times like, "Oh, are you sure you need that you need that extra dessert?" or "Are you sure you want to eat that?" Like, kind of like those subtle ways of saying like, you might want to, cut back a little bit, Elisa. So and I'm not saying, I mean, I think that came from family and friends at times. But I mean, kind of going back to what you were saying, I think that it comes from a good place, because I think that a lot of times, like if I mean, my children are pretty young, and so I probably wouldn't say it to them like right now. I wouldn't want to encourage kind of that body image thing, but we want our children to be healthy. We want them to, and especially like if they're in the dating years, we want them to be able to, get a partner and things like these. And so I think that it comes from a good place to be able to say like, oh, maybe it wasn't, I would want somebody to bring it to my attention if, like, I don't know, I was eating excessively, and if nobody said anything to me and I'm going down this path of like, having issues, I want somebody to say, "Hey, maybe you want to rein that in." But at the same time, it's a hard balance, because we want the best for our kids, we want the best for our family members. Um, but I think at the same time, like, it's hard to tell somebody, "Hey, it might be good for you to lose a little bit of weight." I know my poor husband, he tries to encourage me positively, but it drives me nuts. He'll say, "Oh, let's go for a walk." And I'm like, "I don't want to go for a walk." He's like, "But you could use it." And I'm like, "Oh, that's so rude." But it's coming from a good place, and mind you, probably a couple weeks before that, I said, "Hey, encourage me to go for walks because I need it to be healthy." So he's just trying to follow through. Um, but a lot of times, even if I tell him that, a couple weeks later, I get like upset with him for saying it, or he might. I remember, as a side note, we ran a 5K together, and the whole time he was like, "You got this. You're doing great." And at one point, I just stopped him. I was like, "Please don't give me any more encouragement until we're past the finish line," because to me it was discouraging. And so it's, again, people are trying to be there and trying to be your cheerleader, but depending on where you're at in that moment, it may not work the way that it was intended to. And I think that that's probably how my family looked at it, and maybe that's how some families do it. I think there are instances where family members are just mean. And I don't know if there's any way around that. And so I think that if it's coming from a good place, yeah, it's good to catch it if you are perpetuating that body image. But if you're genuinely trying to help that person, I think that that's a good thing. And so those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I will say that as you were talking, I remembered that whenever we would have family get togethers, and I had family that was, 5 hours from us, and so we'd see them, I would say like maybe once a month. And I swear to you, I had, a couple relatives that would always like give me some observation about my weight. Like, it's like, we just rode 5 hours to see you, but the first thing you're going to say to me is like, "Oh, have you put on some weight? Oh, have you lost some weight?" I mean, it was always about weight. And it was just sort of like, my goodness, it's like, you can't say, "Hey, how are you? I'm glad you made the trip out here." It was always some comment. And it wasn't ever just a neutral observation. It always felt to me, or that's the way I interpret it, that it was like a ding. And so it was really, really hard. And you and I, we started talking about right before we jumped on the podcast, was like how the impression of weight has changed. And so, like, once again, when I was doing some reading, I found like in the 1800s, like a very robust, curvy body was considered very beautiful. And then in the 1900s, because they had to go to the other extreme, a boyish form for women was seen very attractive. And, I would say when I was in high school, and I think you and I said this a little bit, is that, being thin was everything. I mean, that was really the beauty form. And I would say in the last maybe 5 years, 7 years, even the runway models and things, they're really doing a lot to be inclusive. And like Dove had that campaign about real beauty, and that women come in all sizes. And, I think that's really helped a lot. But I will say that, that full bodied or runway model, I mean, when I see a woman of all different shapes on the runway, and the fact that they're being so inclusive, it takes me a minute to catch on. Like my first reaction is like, oh, that's not the way they usually look. Why do they look like that? And then it's like, oh, because women come in different sizes and that's okay. But I actually have to like go through that thought process. Like my first initial reaction is, why is this person a model? Then the next reaction is like, oh, that's because we're trying to be inclusive. And it's almost like I have to coach myself to acceptance, to say, this is okay, this is good, and this is what we need, so that, you know, younger men and women are going to be comfortable and feel like everybody is accepting them regardless of what shape or size or color that they are. But it's sad to me that it takes that kind of a talking through to help me get to where I should automatically be.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that's, I had the same reaction. I think we had talked about the show Girls and how it the fashion in that show and certain things I was taken aback. I was like, oh, you can't wear that if you're a little bit on the heavier side, but like they were wearing it with such confidence, and I was just amazed by like the lack of like no shame, like just wear what you want. And so I thought that was interesting. But the movement for plus size models is awesome. And yet I also kind of was like, oh wow, like she's a model, like that's like it just looks different because we were so conditioned to say that women are in this certain shape and size. And so that I think maybe the younger generations are more able to accept it. I think that the for me, and kind of maybe beyond, it's been a difficult thing to kind of see it and be able to say, okay, that's acceptable, that's a difference. So that's definitely been a change for me as well.
Yeah, and I think you use the word conditioning as the right word, because I think that's what we've done. I mean, we've spent, like for me, I've spent uh, maybe 50 years, being reinforced for this conditioning of a thin physique as being beautiful. And in the last 5 years, it's like we have to get deprogrammed, and we have to see other shapes and acceptance. And so it is, I mean, I think it's a fantastic movement. I wish it had started when I was younger. And that way it would have been something that would have come more easily to me, especially as I was raising, my own child. And so it is challenging, but I think it's something that, it's a good movement and it's making positive strides in where we're going. And I think that it's each of our responsibility to help lift people up to feel comfortable in who they are and their skin, because I think that's when you feel the most beautiful, is when you're completely accepting of yourself. And that's sort of the next topic we're going to talk about, is how do we get there. But I do think that body image is just it's a tough conversation. And I have yet to meet any one person that has really loved their bodies, even if they're very athletic and they're in very good fit shape. They can still tell you what they still want to improve upon. And I think that's the part that's really hard, because most of us look at most women and say, boy, I would do anything to look like that, whether that's, a couple pounds different than you or a lot of pounds different. I mean, I think there's a lot of women who would be like, oh, I'd love to have that body. And yet the person in that body doesn't feel the same way. And I think we need to change our thinking about that and continue to work to, um, you know, accept who we are, where we are, and that'll make us all happier. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any final thoughts that you might have, Alyssa, before we close this out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, overall, again, we're trying to give different perspectives. And I think at the end of the day, if you can move towards that body acceptance, and again, we're going to kind of delve into, a variation of this topic, but, that's really, you know, that's really the goal, is to be comfortable in your own skin and in your own body. And I think that movement really hopefully influences the next generations. And for my children, I'm hopeful that they will get that sense. I know that my daughter recently, she had put together like a paper with one of her friends in class, and they had put handprints, and they colored all the different handprints, different colors and different sizes. And for them, the idea was, and it literally, they titled it like everybody's different. And I was like, oh, wonderful. Like they get it, they get that people come in all different sizes and shapes and colors, and that's okay. And so I'm hopeful that, that this kind of encouragement of being comfortable, body positivity, and those sorts of things, I'm hopeful that that sticks and that we see kind of less of that. But I mean, I guess time will tell what that will look like. Maybe there'll be some other thing that kind of, feeds into that, um, the challenges for women in general. So, like I said, I'm not sure what that'll look like 10, 20 years from now, but I think that there's definitely good movement. But for all of us, it's a matter of finding our own footing and finding acceptance at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that this is another example of like a very, important conversation for women to have and to learn from each other, and to also shape the way that we will talk to the younger generations, and help everybody get to that place, and really approach life differently than maybe some of us have. So even though I found this conversation somewhat uncomfortable, because I feel like I put myself out there in terms of, some of the things that I have dealt with, I do think that, we can't keep it in the closet. We have to talk about it, and we have to help normalize it for everybody. And so, I mean, this is really why we started this podcast, was to talk about issues that directly impact women, and that we need to talk about to be able to get past it. And so I feel like this was, a necessary conversation. I'm glad we had it. And I hope that our listeners will give us some feedback on the Facebook page. That's the group, which is, the same name as our podcast, which is The Deconstructed Woman. And, share some feedback with us and start some conversations, because that's the whole point of this podcast, is to really get, meaty conversations happening, so that we can all share each other's experience and improve, our satisfaction with who we are, and make the relevant changes to make us happier as we get older. So, this is Joji and Alyssa Marie signing off for this episode. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions, or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.